All right, you've really outdone yourself this time. You sent over a ton of material on philosophy, a textbook, some articles, the works. It looks like you're interested in not just Western philosophy, but also indigenous philosophies from all over Africa, Native America, China. This is going to be an amazing deep dive.
It really speaks to your curiosity, wanting to explore how different cultures and traditions um, approach these big questions about life, the universe, and everything.
Exactly. So let's get right to it. Your textbook defines philosophy as trying to understand how things hang together in the broadest sense. But what I found really interesting is this idea that many of these philosophical questions have been pondered across different cultures for centuries.
It's like humanity has this shared intellectual heritage.
Hmm.
For example, your source on ancient Egyptian philosophy highlights their fascination with cosmology and the afterlife, themes that also pop up in ancient Greek thought. Remember how you were surprised about the Egyptians' influence on Greek thinkers?
Oh, yeah. It's wild to think that figures like Pythagoras and Plato actually traveled to Egypt to study with their priests. It really challenges this idea that Western philosophy emerged in a vacuum.
It definitely adds a new layer to that narrative. And it's a great reminder that knowledge and ideas have always flowed across cultures.
Okay, so let's talk about how we even begin to answer these big philosophical questions. The textbook dives into different ways of knowing, and it got me thinking about how much we rely on things like experience, reason, and even what other people tell us.
And how often we might get tricked by our own minds. Your textbook mentions cognitive biases, these mental shortcuts that can lead us to make faulty judgments.
Like confirmation bias, that tendency to only seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, even if it's completely wrong. That's something we probably all struggle with, especially in today's world, where we're bombarded with information from so many sources.
It's why being able to critically evaluate information is so essential. And your textbook provides some really useful tools for that, like the SIFT method.
Right. Stop. Investigate the source. Find better coverage. Trace claims back to the original context. It's like a cheat sheet for navigating the information landscape.
It really empowers you to be more discerning about what you read and share, which is so crucial in our current media environment.
Speaking of challenging assumptions, the metaphysics section of your textbook really blew my mind. We're talking about substance, the self, the existence of God, free will. It gets pretty deep.
Your sources dive into some truly mind-bending concepts. Take, for instance, the ancient Greek philosophers Parmenides and Heraclitus. Parmenides believed that all change is an illusion, a radical idea that everything is fundamentally static.
And then you have Heraclitus, who argued that change is the only alle constant. It's like they're presenting two completely opposite views of reality.
Exactly. And it highlights that within philosophy, there are often multiple, equally valid ways of interpreting the world.
Which brings us to Plato's theory of forms, which your source explains in detail. This idea that there's this invisible realm of perfect, unchanging essences that exist beyond our physical world.
So every physical object we see is just a shadow, an imperfect copy of its perfect form. Like imagine the perfect chair. Every chair you've ever sat on is just striving to reach that ideal form.
It's a pretty wild concept, but it makes you wonder what's truly real and how our senses might be deceiving us.
And speaking of how we perceive the world, your textbook also mentions the ancient Indian philosophers known as the Nyaya Vaisheshika, who had their own fascinating atomic theory.
Right. They believed that everything was made up of atoms, just like the ancient Greeks. But their concept of how those atoms combine was totally different.
Instead of just randomly bumping into each other, they believed similar atoms would form pairs, then triplets, and those triplets would combine in specific ways to create everything we see. It's a very structured and hierarchical view of how matter comes together.
It really makes you appreciate the diversity of thought that exists across different philosophical traditions.
Absolutely. And it's a nice segue into another key concept from your textbook, physicalism, this idea that everything that exists is fundamentally physical.
But as you pointed out, not every philosophical tradition agrees with that view. In many indigenous philosophies, for example, the spiritual and material realms are inseparable.
It really challenges us to expand our understanding of what constitutes reality and to consider perspectives that might differ from our own cultural assumptions.
Okay, so we've explored how we acquire knowledge and different perspectives on the nature of reality. But where I think philosophy gets really interesting is when we start talking about values, those ought questions.
It's where things get really personal, right?
Yeah.
Because it forces us to grapple with questions like, what's a good life? What are our responsibilities to others? How should we live in the world?
Exactly. And your textbook does a great job of highlighting the distinction between facts and values. This idea that just because something is a certain way doesn't mean it ought to be that way.
That's such a crucial point. It reminds me of an example from your source on political philosophy. Just because a certain society has always been hierarchical doesn't automatically mean that hierarchy is morally justified.
It forces us to question those power structures and consider alternative ways of organizing society. And speaking of moral frameworks, the textbook also delves into different ethical theories like utilitarianism and the ethics of care.
Utilitarianism, often associated with philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, focuses on maximizing happiness for the greatest number of people. It's like a moral cost-benefit analysis.
But as the textbook points out, it's not always that simple. What about individual rights? What if sacrificing the happiness of a few leads to greater happiness for the many? That's where things get tricky.
Exactly, and that's where the ethics of care offers a different perspective. It emphasizes empathy relationships and our responsibility to care for those who are most vulnerable.
It's less about calculating happiness and more about recognizing our interconnectedness and the importance of compassion in ethical decision making.
And it raises interesting questions about how we prioritize our moral obligations. Do we have a greater responsibility to those we're in close relationships with, or should our ethical considerations extend to all beings equally?
It's a lot to ponder. Speaking of different philosophical traditions, your sources also delve into the realm of political and social philosophy. It's fascinating to see how ancient thinkers like Confucius in China and Aristotle in Greece grappled with ideas about justice, governance, and the ideal society.
And how those ideas continue to shape political discourse today. For example, your source on Confucianism mentions the concept of lie, which emphasizes ritual propriety and the importance of social harmony.
It's like a blueprint for ethical behavior and social order. And it's interesting to contrast that with the ancient Greek concept of the polis, which placed a strong emphasis on citizen participation in government.
Right. The polis is more than just a city-state. It represented the ideal of a self-governing community where citizens actively shape their own destiny.
Which raises the question, what is our role as individuals in shaping the political landscape? And how do different philosophical traditions view that role?
It's a question that has resonated through the centuries, and it's as relevant today as it ever was. And your sources also delved into more specific political and ethical dilemmas, like the concept of a just war.
That's a topic that's always fascinated me. How do we determine when it's morally permissible to go to war, and what are the ethical limits of warfare?
Your textbook traces the history of just war theory back to philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, who laid out some key principles.
Yeah.
A just cause, legitimate authority, right intention. But as you can imagine, applying those principles in the real world is anything but straightforward.
Especially in today's world with complex conflicts and new technologies of warfare, it really challenges us to grapple with those tough questions about violence, power, and our responsibilities in a globalized world.
And speaking of ethical challenges, your sources on bioethics are particularly timely given all the advances in areas like genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and reproductive technologies. It feels like we're constantly confronted with new dilemmas that push the boundaries of our ethical understanding.
It's like we're living in a science fiction novel. But these are real issues with profound implications for our lives and for humanity as a whole.
Your source on bioethics lays out some key principles that help us navigate these murky waters: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. But as you can imagine, these principles can sometimes clash.
Like in the case of a patient refusing a life-saving treatment, how do you balance their right to autonomy with your duty to act in their best interests? It's a classic ethical dilemma with no easy answers.
And your source explores some even thornier bioethical dilemmas, like abortion and euthanasia, where deeply held beliefs and values often come into conflict.
These are incredibly sensitive and complex issues, and I appreciate how your sources present different perspectives without taking sides. It's about fostering a thoughtful and respectful dialogue rather than trying to impose a single right answer.
Because ultimately, these are questions that each individual in society has to wrestle with, drawing on their own moral compass and understanding of the world.
And that same need for thoughtful engagement applies to environmental ethics, a topic that feels increasingly urgent given the state of our planet.
Your sources on environmental ethics really highlight the interconnectedness of all things. It's not just about protecting the environment for our own sake, but recognizing the intrinsic value of the natural world and our moral obligation to be responsible stewards of the planet.
It's like expanding our circle of compassion to include not just other humans, but all living beings and even the ecosystems themselves.
Exactly. Your textbook explores different ethical frameworks for thinking about our relationship with nature, from anthropocentrism, which centers human interest, to biocentrism, which extends moral consideration to all living things, to ecocentrism, which views the entire ecosystem as having intrinsic value.
Each perspective raises important questions about our responsibilities to future generations and the long-term consequences of our actions. It's clear that we can't just continue on our current path without considering the impact we're having on the planet.
And it's not just about abstract principles. It's about making concrete choices in our daily lives that reflect our values and our commitment to a sustainable future. Whether it's reducing our carbon footprint, supporting sustainable agriculture, or advocating for environmental policies, we all have a role to play in shaping a more ethical relationship with the natural world.
It's amazing how these philosophical threads weave together, isn't it? From the ancient Greeks pondering the nature of reality to contemporary bioethicists grappling with cutting-edge dilemmas, it feels like we're all part of this ongoing conversation about what it means to be human in an ever-changing world.
And what I find so inspiring is that you're actively engaging in that conversation. Your sources reveal a deep curiosity about not just the world around you, but also your place within it.
Yeah, it's so easy to get swept up in the day-to-day and lose sight of those bigger questions. But philosophy reminds us to pause, reflect, and challenge our assumptions.
And to recognize that there are multiple ways of seeing the world, each with its own strengths and limitations.
For sure, your sources cover so much ground, from metaphysics to ethics to political philosophy. It's like you're on a quest for wisdom, drawing from different traditions and perspectives to create your own unique understanding of life.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not about finding one right answer, but about exploring these complex ideas, challenging our own beliefs, and expanding our horizons.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a question for you to ponder. Given all the different philosophical approaches you've encountered, which ones resonate most deeply with you? Which ones challenge you to think differently or see the world in a new light?
That's a powerful question to sit with. Because ultimately, philosophy isn't just an academic exercise, it's about how we live our lives, the choices we make, and the values we embrace.
It's about finding meaning and purpose in a complex world and using these philosophical tools to navigate the challenges and opportunities that life throws our way.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the world of philosophy. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these big ideas and that they've sparked some new insights and questions for you to continue pondering.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep seeking that deeper understanding of yourselves and the world around you.